Having left our wives at home, my friend and I decided to go on a 2-day hike through Kaluga region, which is in central Russia, to visit an ancient Slavic settlement. The Slavic holiday of Ivan Kupala was just around the corner, so the idea turned out to be very symbolic. Judging by the photos on the internet, now only a small embankment remained of the once thriving settlement. And all the valuables buried underground have long been stolen. But that wasn't the main point. The main thing was that we had a goal. We left the car on a small dirt road and soon found a gorgeous forest trail. Winding through streams, ravines, and fields, a few hours later we came out on the sunny bank of a small river. The settlement itself stood not far from the trail. After drinking a couple of beers, we decided to set up our tents. Then we built a bonfire, jumped over it, cooked stew with buckwheat, threw axes and spears. Herman started to claim that he saw a faint glow in the undergrowth, but I didn't buy it. Soon, we lay down in our tents and fell asleep. The party was a success. It was already late at night when I woke up to loud noises. At night in the forest, it always seems to me that someone is walking around the tent. It's easy to mistake a mouse, a hedgehog, and even the rustle of leaves in the wind for human steps. But the sounds were different now. "Herman, is that you?" I asked quietly. There was an indistinct whisper in response. It seemed like Herman's voice, but I was not sure. At that moment, the footsteps quickly went to the forest. My heart rate jumped up. But what's the big deal? A sleepy man went to pee. It happens to everyone. I was trying to fall asleep to the sound of nightbirds singing, but after about 10 minutes I realized that Herman had not returned. Chapter 2. Someone is here. What if it wasn't Herman? I cautiously leaned out and saw that Herman's tent was open and there was no one inside. I was getting nervous. I wanted Herman to come back as soon as possible, and there would be no problems. I decided to wait for 20 minutes, which would be more than enough for him to do what he wanted to. But time passed unexpectedly quickly, and apart from the singing and fluttering of birds, there were no sounds. Yes, the birds clearly felt like the masters of this forest. It was a little scary for me to do this in the night forest, but I came out of the tent and shouted my friend's name at the top of my voice. Thrice. There was no response. I had to look for Herman. Maybe there was a well near the camp that he fell into. The thought that he or both of us were in danger stuck in my head. It's worth mentioning that I have one unusual hobby. I read footprints. I don't have a hunting or special forces background. I just studied a couple of manuals and practiced by walking in parks and on a mushroom hunt. So, I could track Herman down. Fortunately, the weather was good. It rained all week before the weekend, so the grass and soil were soft. Shining my flashlight, I actually saw the footprints of Herman, who came out of the tent and went into the forest. I followed the footsteps, counting them. 100, 200, 300. With a confident step, Herman walked in a straight line into the thicket of the forest. A man who goes to pee wouldn't go that far. I shone the light into the distance, and the footprints stretched away. Something was wrong. I didn't want to go any further. Herman had a half-hour head start, and he could be very far away. I stood there for about 5 minutes, staring into the darkness. Then I went to the camp and began to think about what it could be. A silly joke? Not his style. Did he need to go home urgently? But why, without his stuff and without telling me? And do birds always sing so loudly at night? As I approached the camp, fog began to spread over the river. I was going to get back into the tent, but then I saw human footprints near it. They definitely weren't there when I went out. The tracks were coming from the river, stopped near both tents and went along the path. I was shaking. The step of the man who left the footprints was also frightening. In several places he lay down on the ground, hiding behind the trees. He was obviously trying to go unnoticed. I quickly got into the tent, and in order to gather my thoughts a little, I decided to check what had been stolen. It turned out to be nothing. Only my sleeping bag was bitten through. Chapter 3. The Search for Herman. It's probably some kind of alcoholic. Yes, that's right, an ordinary drunk. He wandered 10 kilometers from the nearest village, looked for a drink with us, and left with nothing. Yes, that's right. I'm sure he won't be back. But where's Herman? I was pretty sure he needed my help. It was scary to think that he and the barefoot man could cross paths. Having gathered my willpower, I decided to follow Herman's footsteps all the way. I was moving as quietly as possible and didn't turn on the flashlight unnecessarily. I was afraid to see our night guest behind every tree. At first, Herman's step was fast and confident. He clearly knew where he was going and why. I was fascinated by reading the footprints, and did not notice at once that Herman turned and headed back towards the camp. Maybe he heard a stranger before me and tried to hide? This thought cheered me up, and I quickened my pace. All I could think about was how to see Herman as soon as possible, although it wasn't easy to think with the birds in the woods. I became inattentive, tripped over dead wood, and scratched my face with branches. Herman also quickened his pace, stumbled, and even fell. Soon, the tracks led me to a small moonlit meadow. Gray clouds were racing across the sky, and the branches of the trees were swaying from a weak but persistent wind. What I saw there in that meadow hit me like a ton of bricks. Herman's sneakers were hung on a branch of a small tree. A barefoot trail led away towards the camp. If 5 minutes ago I worried about Herman, now the desire to meet him is gone. All the soil under the tree was dug up with bare hands. The lower branches were broken off. A bird's silhouette was absurdly scratched on a tree with a knife, as if by a 3-year-old child. And under the tree, there was a strange construction made of branches that looked like some kind of pagan symbol. Screams and chirps of nightingales, larks, and reed warblers could be heard directly overhead. Aggressive, harsh notes appeared in them. For a second, it seemed to me that a faint green light started shining in the fern thicket. Chapter 4. Escape. I was completely alone, abandoned in a dark forest. I didn't see anyone or anything that night, but the footprints on the ground showed something absolutely sinister. Now, I was sure that the footprints in our camp belonged to Herman, and he was looking for me. We need to get out of here. I tried to pull myself together and think where to go, and where would Herman look for me? From the camp, his footprints went to the path we were on to come here. Apparently, Herman was walking to the car. I couldn't imagine what had gotten into him, what condition he was in, and what he wanted from me. But meeting him seemed like the worst-case scenario. The birdsong turned into continuous laughter. Only now, it started to seem really strange to me. The sudden appearance of a black spot startled me. A huge raven landed on a stump nearby. After studying me carefully, he flew off in the direction of our car. I looked around and saw dozens of bird silhouettes in the trees around the meadow. I was sure that the raven had flown away to inform Herman about me. I was imagining things in my head all night, and I've already stopped distinguishing reality from my fantasy. The nearest village was not far from our car. I remembered that there was another one in the opposite direction. That's where I was going. I didn't waste any time running after Hermann's bare footsteps. They were heading in the right direction at this point. I saw Hermann digging the ground here and there, tearing his hair, rolling in the mud. There were traces of blood on the ground in several places. In one place, a barefoot trail entered a terrible thicket of nettles. I was afraid to imagine what Hermann looked like now. Near the river, the tracks turned into the camp, and I crossed the river. At the deepest point, it barely reached my hips and continued in a straight line. It was on the other shore that I felt safe for the first time. I was sure that the water was a boundary that only I could cross, and that all the evil spirits remained there in that damned settlement. After passing the floodplain of the river, at the edge of the forest, I looked back for the last time. In the light of the moon, a huge owl hooted loudly over the settlement.
Happy holidays.
As if it was coming from an old tape recorder. I didn't look back anymore. During the interrogation, I got confused in my testimony and became known more as a fool than a murderer of a friend. Hermann was never seen again, and his family never received any information about him. But I know he's alive. Every year on Ivan Kupala, I see crime reports with the same beginning. In Kaluga region, in an ancient settlement. I don't read any further.
Dasha is a salesgirl at a small grocery store near my house. I often go there to buy some bread or milk. If I have time, I'm happy to chat with her. On that day, when I returned from work, I realized that I had lost the apartment keys somewhere. There was no one at home, and in order to somehow pass the time before my husband returned, I decided to walk to the store. Maybe I'd get lucky, and Dasha's shift was today. Lucky. Dasha greeted me warmly and was happy to chat. Moreover, there were still few customers, mostly local drunks who were going to celebrate the Russian national holiday, Friday. Actually, we started talking about mysticism by accident. It was Friday the 13th. How can I not touch on topics that tickle my nerves? Of course, I'm not going to completely convey the conversation. I will only tell the story that Dasha had the courage to tell me. I was 17 at the time. My then future husband and I decided to go to my grandmother's village for the weekend. We were going to leave before dark, but alas, we were packing up for too long and hit the road only at midnight. We did most of the journey quickly, but as soon as we turned off the highway onto a country road, things went much slower. The situation was further complicated by the fact that it had recently rained, and our German car somehow did not look very much like a tank, which, as you know, is not afraid of mud. But I'm almost a local. I've spent every summer here since I was a child, and naturally I knew a shortcut that would significantly reduce the time of our torment. In short, having made an attempt to drive some kind of trail, we finally and irrevocably settled in a puddle. A couple of hours passed in vain attempts to get the car out. Then, for about 2 more hours, we stupidly sat in the car and smoked. As soon as it started to get a little light, I decided to go to the village for help. I didn't have a mobile phone at that time. It was 20 years ago, they weren't so popular back then. Moreover, my beloved one forgot to put some money on his phone account before leaving, and his phone balance was 0, so we had no choice but to call for backup. To the groom's timid objections, I replied, "The places, they say, are deaf here. Only locals know the right path." Really, that's how it was. I was afraid to meet a wild fox or some kind of rabid dog. Anyway, after some wrangling, it was decided. I'm going to get help. There was a lot of tramping to be done, about 4 kilometers along the road. There was, of course, a much shorter route through the forest, which I was well aware of because, as a girl, while vacationing here with my grandparents, I walked with friends all over the area. But it wasn't light enough outside yet, and I hadn't walked here in ages, so I was afraid of getting lost. I was walking briskly along the side of the road when suddenly a human figure appeared 15 or 20 meters away from me. Yes, it did, because later, analyzing everything that happened, I realized that even in the dim light of the morning on a deserted road, a human silhouette or any movement can be seen from a greater distance. But then, having experienced a sleepless night, it somehow did not occur to me. A woman, and by all indications it was a lady, was slowly pacing along the edge of the road and apparently in no hurry. Hastening my pace, I got even closer to her, and in the same second confirmed the guess that had dawned on me from the very beginning. This young lady was familiar to me. Nastya, a young woman, was stomping in front of me. She was just like us, a summer resident who came to the village every year and hung out there all summer with her husband and children. Nastya was still walking the same way, and despite the complete silence around her, she did not react at all to my footsteps from behind. What was she doing on the road at such a time? I found the answer to this question very quickly. Nastya's husband, Roman, loved to drink, and after a few drinks, he sometimes made scandals and beat her. The whole village always ran to save his wife. It looked like they had a fight again, so Nastya left for a walk, just not to see that drunk. "Nastya!" I called out to my neighbor. She turned around, looked at me, and wasn't surprised at all. "What are you doing here?" I decided to ask. Nastya sighed and waved her hand, saying, "Don't ask. Well, it's definitely Roma, damn him. He's completely driven his wife to the edge." Without waiting for her response, I told everything, about the stuck car, and about the fact that I was going to the village for help. "It's faster through the woods." Nastya suddenly became inspired for some reason. "Nastya, I was afraid to go through the forest. I don't remember the road anymore. Let me walk you out." With these words, she grabbed my hand and dragged me towards the forest. Well, maybe it's a good thing I met her. I'll get to the village faster. Nastya walked confidently through the forest, not letting go of my hand, while I trotted behind like a small dog on a leash, trying not to trip over any snag. At some point, it suddenly seemed to me that we were going the wrong way, and not at all in the direction of the village. Of course, I didn't remember the way very well, but somewhere on the subconscious level, I felt that something was wrong. "Nastya, are we really going the right way?" I shouted, looking at the back of my neighbor's head. Nastya didn't even flinch. Moreover, she took a step faster. A few seconds later, we were literally running through the woods. Nastya was in front. I was still behind her. "Nastya, damn it! Stop! Enough! Where are we going?" "Stop!" I screamed at the top of my voice. She didn't react. I tried to pull my hand away, but Nastya held it so tightly that I couldn't. Moreover, there was a feeling as if the neighbor's hand was somehow rough, as if it were made of sandpaper. It's strange how I didn't feel it right away. "Stop it, finally!" I wailed like a fire siren. And then, Nastya looked around. What I saw at that moment made me scream in horror. Instead of a young and quite pretty neighbor, an old woman was looking at me. No, I'm not speaking figuratively. It was already light enough, and Nastya was close enough to me that I could see her face. It was thin, wrinkled, like a baked apple, and scary. Her eyes were wide open, and her lips twisted into a sinister smile. Staring at me, Nastya did not slow down. We continued to rush through the forest in an unknown direction. "I must pray," was born in my head, and barely catching my breath, I began to recite the first prayer I remembered. And you know, coincidence or not, it has loosened its grip. I pulled away and ran away with all my strength. I don't know if someone was really chasing me, but at that moment it seemed to me that so-called Nastya was running after me and was about to catch up. The fact that I ran straight to my grandmother's village was nothing short of a miracle. At home, my grandmother and parents greeted me. It turned out they had arrived the day before. I couldn't even tell anyone about what happened to me. I only started talking after a while when I digested what had happened. "Do Do you know what else is interesting? As it turned out, Nastya herself was not in the village at that time. That stupid girl decided to give birth to her third child from that rowdy Roma and was hospitalized for her own safety.